Hey, and welcome to Finlos Lives. Before I get into the meat of this episode, I just want to talk about the creative process a little bit. This is the fifth or sixth time that I'm starting the recording of this episode. Not for any sort of lack of interest or content or plan even. I have an outline that I've done that I wrote a couple weeks back, and I don't know, I've just been struggling to get through the process of finding the voice that I want to come through in the recording. And I don't know, I think I'm just getting really in my head about what this is. And so this message is as much for myself as it is for anybody who's listening, to just remember that it's all a process, and just get it done, and we'll see how it turns out. So again, welcome to Finlos Lives. And I've been really thinking about the idea of self and identity, and where our sense of self comes from, where it is established, how it's established, when it's established, and whether or not once sort of the heart of who we are has taken root, can we change it? How much can we shape it? How much can we modify who we are? Or once that definition has been formed, is any sort of attempt at change later on in life an act? Is it putting a new coat of paint on something? I don't know. And so I've just been sitting with this idea for a while, because as most people at some point in their life do, we realize that there's aspects of ourselves that we're not happy with, that we would like to change, that we would like to become a more realized or a better or a more complete version of ourselves than we are right now. So I wonder, can we ever break away from the definitions of self that we acquired in our childhoods? And maybe I've just been feeling a little introspective lately. Maybe it's because my birthday is coming around soon. Maybe it's because both of our kids have just transitioned to like big transitional years. One's in 5th grade, one's in 8th grade. Maybe it's understanding that being in a partnership with a person for more than 20 years sometimes brings out aspects of myself that I was sure that I had put to rest already. In any case, who I am and who I want to be, and the space in between those things has been on my mind. From the earliest experiences of parental praise or criticism, to the ups and downs of siblinghood, to the more subtle undercurrents of peer pressure and social interactions, the messages that we're constantly hearing and interpreting about what others are saying about us, it constructs the narratives or the stories of ourselves that we carry. So in this episode, I'm going to be digging into the origins of my identity, and maybe through that you can find something of a commonality in yours. I'm also going to talk about the cognitive dissonance of competing messages of self that we hear, how we are often constrained by our fears, and hopefully, ultimately, the liberating act of self-definition, of understanding who we are and being able to make and remake ourselves as needed. I think it's helpful to consider who we are is shaped a lot by, if not entirely by, the people that we are exposed to and surrounded by at a very young age. Our experiences and our memories obviously shape those things, but so much of our early interactions are shaped by the people. And first and foremost, obviously, is our parents. These are the people, if we're, and I don't want to get too deep into the questions of, two parents, mixed families, things like that, but just the idea of parenting, of the adults who raise us, who begin to shape our ideas of right and wrong, our goals, our values, our morals, our ethics, all of these sort of big philosophical ideas that lay the groundwork for who we are. All of that's coming from mostly our parents at first. The first 4, 5, 6 years of our lives, the big overarching themes and directions of our lives are dictated by our parents. They are our caretakers, our caregivers. They decide so much of the things that we do, the foods that we eat, the activities that we participate in. So much of our identity comes from those first interactions. And that's a lot. If I think about the interactions with my parents, I mean, I love them and I'm very thankful for what they were able to offer me, but no parent is perfect. And some of the issues and ongoing struggles that I encounter on a daily basis are also because of experiences that I've had with my parents, things that they laid upon me that don't necessarily sync with what I as an individual actually hold to be true. So many doubts about myself come from the spaces between what my parents told me that I could and should do versus what I want to do and what I can actually do. And that's such a powerful and scary thing, especially as we get older. If we have parents who are still alive and still part of our lives, and then as those roles sort of develop and change to where children become caregivers for parents, some of those some really problematic toxic relationship patterns can rear their heads again, and it's really interesting. Another source of identity in our youth, obviously, is if we have siblings. And for me, I'm the youngest of 5, and so I have 4 older siblings, and they're all a lot older than me, actually. My oldest sibling is 12 years older than me. The sibling who's closest in age to me is 5 years older than me. And so a lot of the messages that I was hearing as a child from my siblings, well, depending on which one it was kind of limited because they were so much older than me. A lot of the time our paths didn't cross. I spent the most time with my sister, who's the one who's 5 years older than me. She's the one with whom I probably have the most in common with, and from whom I received a lot of the messaging around who I am and who I could be. But I do find it interesting that there are so many people that I know who derive so much of their identity from their siblings, whereas for me, I don't feel as if who I am now is reflective of the relationships that I had with my siblings. Because honestly, a lot of the messages that I received were what I would now, as an adult, kind of hear as negative. A lot of time it was a distancing because our ages were so different. There just wasn't a lot of interaction. And I recognize that for others, if they were closer in age or if they were more closely bonded with their siblings, that there could be a huge overlap in identity and similarity in that regard. But as we got older, or as I got older, we move into our school experiences, and teachers, especially if in our personality type, and I'm even thinking like how much of this is because of my parents, but I had an affinity for authority figures, especially teachers as a child. Some people might call it a teacher's pet. Other people just might say I got along better with adults. Whatever you want to say, I always strove to both respect my teachers and for them to have a strong regard for me. And because of that, the messaging that I received from teachers was always very important. And there are more than a handful of teachers that I can think of off the top of my head who I still hold in extremely high regard and whose words carried a lot of weight in shaping the way that I think about life and thinking about learning and thinking about my strengths and my abilities and my tendencies, even, and my interests. And that, in a lot of ways, especially in the United States, in the way that we view teachers in education, we spend almost more time with our teachers than we do with our parents. And that's an interesting thing to think about, and why sometimes there's now conflict between when parents and teachers are trying to vie for the hearts and minds of young people. I find that very interesting, especially having been a teacher for so long. Friends, the people that we socialize with as young people can have an effect. We can see how other people's families operate, and that might in turn create some jealousies, or maybe we just hear messages from our friends that might clash with what our families are saying. So oftentimes our friends, I think, are our first opportunities to sort of consider alternative ways of being and alternative ways of living. And I think it's really important at a young age to have a diverse group of friends with lots of different types of people and lots of different types of experiences, in order to sort of share the learning process about how we're experiencing the world. And finally, there's just that wider world. There's the media that we're consuming. There's just the people who occupy space in our world. There's the one-off interactions that really shape the way that we think about strangers and people, that really come to kind of round off who we are. And as I'm thinking about all of these different elements that go into play in sort of shaping what I think of who I am, it's no wonder that as we get older, we come to understand how much dissonance or how much disconnect there is between what we're told we are or what we should be and what we actually come to find ourselves to be. We hear these messages of you can do anything, or you're so amazing, etc. But then when you actually go to do those things, it doesn't quite turn out that way, and we struggle. Or you have siblings who tell you, no, you're stupid, or no, don't do that, or whatever it is. And then you have friends who are like, oh, that's so stupid. What do you mean? And they support you. So it's just constant mixed messaging. And it's really no wonder that we can struggle with really understanding who we are. We can hear these contradicting messages and really struggle to figure out what feels right and what feels good, and the idea of what feels right for me in my skin. And that's such an abstract and intangible thing at times. It feels like, I want to be this thing. This feels right to me, but not necessarily knowing exactly what that is. And so I keep coming back to this idea of cognitive dissonance, and forgive a return to kind of basic psychology, but cognitive dissonance is a psychological state which arises from conflicting beliefs or behaviors. And when we encounter contradictory messages about our worth or our potential, a sense of internal discord emerges. I take that definition and immediately there's some, I want to put it into sort of like an embodied analogy, right? We understand what those words means, but what does the experience actually feel like? And so my first thought was coloring sheets. When I was a kid, I loved to color in coloring sheets, and now they have all sorts of fancy adult coloring books. But I think a good analogy for cognitive dissonance, or just dissonance in general, is when you're working on a coloring sheet and you have all of your crayon strokes going in the same direction, so it looks really smooth. And some people, myself included, would like put a heavy line on the black lines to sort of give a strong sense of where the outline is, and everything's going great. And then you just have that one stroke that goes outside the line, and it's minor, it's not a big deal, but that one missed stroke, it gives a sense that the whole thing is ruined, and it just doesn't feel right. It is off. It is irritating, and it is annoying, and it is wrong. It just feels wrong. Maybe you're at a musical performance, like a classical music, like where there's precise instrumentation needed, and there's one missed note, And that's the note that you'll hear. Like everything else, the rest of the performance can be perfect, but that one bad note might just be all that rings in your ears, and that's all you remember from the show. Or you're eating your favorite meal, and the texture of the food is right, the smell is right, the taste is right, but the meal was cooked in an oven where something was burned in the previous preparation, and so the food tastes good, but there's that hint of burnt flavor that lingers on your tongue that just creates a disconnect between what the meal should be and what you're actually experiencing. There's these discrepancies. There's that stroke outside the line of the crayon. There's that missed note. There's that burnt aftertaste that otherwise that mars an otherwise perfect meal. And those discrepancies, right? It's a discrepancy. It's an error. It's a space between what we're expecting and what we're actually getting, and it creates this tension that is destabilizing. It's the discrepancy between our internal narrative and the evidence that we're receiving. Somebody tells me I can do this, that I should do this, but when I do it, it's not right, and then boom, I am wrong, I am flawed, I am broken, there's something wrong with me. If I work hard enough, I should be able to do it, yet I can't, no matter how hard I try. That's that destabilizing tension. And these tensions that we all experience cognitive dissonance in our lives. They're minor at their inception. There are these minor things, these little niggling experiences, but they layer over each other and they deepen over time, and they become neuroses, and they become these tics, and ultimately they are these neuroses and these tics are at the heart of our mental health challenges as we age, our depression and our inability to create change, and our internal narratives of failure and brokenness and flawed skill sets or whatever. They start from these small seeds of dissonance, and it's really frustrating. And when you think about it, it's silly. It seems silly. It is silly. But for some reason, it's just become so hard. It's just become so hard. So I do fear that so much of who I am is still, like even now, shaped by these messages that I receive from the words that people told me about what they saw about me, what they felt about me, what they anticipated, what they expected me to be, rather than allowing me to find myself or taking an active role in crafting an identity. There's a couple of things that go along with it. Is that realistic? We are entities that exist in a world of people and of inputs, and so to the idea that we can form ourselves entirely free of input is ludicrous. We can't do that. But is there a way maybe that we could foster independence in young people, to encourage even the youngest of people to begin questioning and thinking about their experiences in ways that heighten their ability to take control of their identity? I don't know. It's just interesting. It's a hard question to ponder. And even now, like with Eva and I and our two kids, I wonder if there's a way of approaching parenting that allows for our very young children to express and find themselves in ways without having to imprint so many of our messy values and judgments that become damaging to them later in our lives. Like how many of the problematic behaviors and issues that I can identify with my own parents have I passed on, and that cause in me such a profound sense of shame and guilt, not in a way that is debilitating, but it's just a concern. I want our children to to understand that they have a say, that they have a choice, that we're doing the best that we can, but that we're not perfect. And they have the ability to think also about who they are. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm trying to remember that I should begin from an understanding that most people do not intend to do harm with their words, especially when the words are said to be constructive. But now understanding that we need to be mindful of how the words we use might land. We might need to consider our own motives for what we're saying and why we're saying those things. How much of what we say is intended to bring other people down because we ourselves feel so insecure, or how much of what we say to another person is intended to make them feel better so that they like us more. That is something that I'm working really hard to be mindful of, is what is my own intention when I speak and when I say things to other people, and what am I hearing and why am I hearing it when other people speak to me? Because we all have a tendency to sort of want to get defensive when we feel as if we're being criticized in some way. And as I continue to talk about identity, there's many theories about it and where it comes from, how it's derived, but also how it's expressed. And I will say that I'm having this conversation with an understanding that I exist in the world with other people, and that we all cause wakes with our words and actions, like ripples, and that the things that I do and say cause consequences in the world that are felt around me. Like, I'm not going to delve into the epistemological questions of what is real. Like we're not going to have any Cartesian logic battles, but I have to function with the sense of, with an understanding that I am here surrounded by people, and I affect those people and they affect me. So my basic understanding is that my identity is my sense of who I am. It is myself. It's who I am, and it's what I do in the form of the actions that I take. It's what I do in the forms of how I pursue things that bring me joy. It's what I do in the form of my work and how I'm productive in the world, how I make and do things. It's what I do in the service of building community and being a part of a community. And it's what's in the space between these things and the space between those things and me that I want to present in relation to others, so that they experience me in the real and true sense, which, again, it's inherently subjective and flexible. And it's that subjectivity of expression that can be challenging, because we are, or we should be, constantly shifting how we communicate based on the audience and the context of where and when we're presently existing. It's a way to show courtesy and to acknowledge that there are others in the world whose experience is different from mine and from yours. Not that you are shifting who you are to fit in with various groups. So code switching, it's shifting how we speak and how we communicate dependent upon our audience. And the ability to adapt one's communication style to different social contexts is an essential aspect of human interaction. Like, we need to be able to do this. Code switching is the fluid transition between different linguistic styles, and it allows us to connect with many different types of people in many different situations. But it's also essential to distinguish between that code switching and chameleon behavior, which, as separate from code switching, involves excessive conformity to the point of losing one's authentic self. Whereas code switching is a conscious and strategic adjustment of language, tone, and demeanor to suit a particular situation. The core sense of who you are never goes away while you're adapting to different situations. Whereas chameleon behavior is the excessive and unconscious adaptation of one's behavior, beliefs, and values to fit into a specific social group or a specific situation. And it can involve suppressing one's true self to conform to the expectations of others. And with that constant changing, it can lead to a loss of authenticity. It can cause one to lose their sense of self. It can cause them to lose their sense of an ability to experience joy because the things that would bring their joy to their true selves are no longer theirs because they are instead trying to adapt and conform to whatever the pursuits of joy for this other group are. It's really scary because we're all expected and we all should be able to modify how we speak and how we communicate and how we listen depending on who we're with and where we are. And I think that most people move through the world meeting people and taking people at their word for who they are. And that means that we're all taking risks all the time because how are we ever to know whether or not the version of this person that we're talking to is truly a representation of who they are? Because even as we code shift, who we are should not be shifting. What brings us joy should not be shifting. Our sense of self and our identity and our morals and what we view as being valuable should not be shifting. Just how we communicate them. So identity shifts do occur over time, especially in situations when we come to understand that we have done harm and we want to do better by and for those to whom we have done the harm, and we want to work to avoid doing more harm in the future. Growth should be an aspect of our identity so that shifting and learning and growing and adapting, evolving are a natural part of living, but not crisis-inducing, because I know that I've had my fair share of those moments of like, oh my God, what am I doing? And who am I? That's a terrifying feeling. Growth should happen naturally. Our identities are fluid in the sense that we're always adding new experiences for context. But our cores, who we are, should not change like that, should not be shifting. And so I think I'm coming to an end here, I really want to think about sort of the big questions that I've had as I was thinking about this, or what the questions that actually brought me to this topic, to this question of identity, or this exploration of identity. And I wonder how much of who I am now was shaped or formed or created or augmented or tainted by the words and messages I received from the people who I encountered in my childhood. Right, that's where I started. How much of who I am did I acquire from the messages I was receiving from others? And how much of who I am is intrinsic to me and my experiences? How much of my identity have I shaped, and have I molded, and have I grown from my experiences, my conscious efforts? And that really leads me to the crisis question: is that, am I an amalgam of identities imparted to me by others? Is there really ever a true self, a singular me? And where this comes from is that I struggle a lot with it sounds trite, but negative self-talk, right? I'm constantly feeling the burden of doubting myself. And it's interesting, as part of preparing for this episode, I made a list of all of the very specific negative things I can remember people having ever said about me, and the positive things too. So I listed negatives and positives, and it became very painfully obvious that as I was making this list, I can remember far more specific negative comments than I could specific positive comments. I'm sure that they're there, but I can't remember them. I remember a feeling of being loved, and I remember the understanding that my family and my parents care. They were a presence in my childhood and my adolescence. They showed up to the events that were important to me. They supported me. They loved me. And yet, when I hear their voices in my head, it is far easier for me to hear the very specific negative messages that they said. And I wonder why that is. And I did some research, and again, I don't want to get into too much into the into the weeds of this, there's some people who say it's a biological thing, that it's actually evolutionary, that we remember negative messages as a way of like protecting ourselves. We remember that these words were said, which that creates a sense of danger. And so we remember those people as being threats. And that's really a very interesting way of thinking about it. There's also people there's psychologists who think of language as being just as traumatic as physical abuse, that it's a form of emotional abuse, obviously. And so those words repeated over time, negative words repeated over time, cause biological trauma, physical trauma to our brains. And so of course they stick. As somebody who's interested in biology and psychology, like I find that to be very interesting. But I want to know, how can I take ownership of my identity? How can I continue to feed myself to be the person that I feel myself to be, and to continue to grow into the person that I want to be? Because even as I approach my next birthday in my 40s, I'm still not all the way there yet. I know that I still have growing to do, and I want to foster that growth in the best way possible. And so I think that's all of this is an exercise in reflection and in challenging myself to be listening to those internal voices in my mind and separate those that belong to the people who contributed from the voice that is actually mine, from the voice that is really me instructing myself on the path to the me that I want to be. I do believe that I have a say in who I am. I think it's scary. I think it's easy to be able to blame those negative voices from the other people. It's easier. It's more convenient to be able to say I am who I am because of those people. But I don't want that. I want to be the person that I am because I choose to be. I don't want to keep using that excuse of my childhood experiences as a reason to neglect the work of self-realization and of actualization, and ultimately of becoming me. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. This one took me a while to develop and refine, so it may sound and feel a little different. As with most things, this podcast is a work in progress. But if you have questions, thoughts, or reactions, I'd love to hear them. You can share them with me via social media. You can email me, finlos@finloslives.com, or leave a voice message with the SpeakPipe app at the website, finloslives.com. I look forward to our next conversation.